على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So inshallah we're going to continue from should be page number 32.
Paragraph. Stop. Page 31.
We're going to start on our last lesson. So it should be 32 at the top, second paragraph. It says, hence if someone asks, why did he subhanahu wa ta'ala do such and such, then has indeed rejected the command of the Quran and has disbelieved. So here we're talking about predestiny of the qadr, the affairs of our life, whatever occurs in our life is predestined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's already written down. Right? So whatever happens, it was meant to happen like that. It was going to happen like that no matter what. So there's no such thing as it says here that, and if someone says, why did such and such happen? Why did so and so do such and such? Right? Then, like I mentioned an example, for example, a person was driving and he was speeding. He wasn't even speeding, imagine he was just casually driving and someone pulled it out on him and then he had an accident and he got injured and someone said, if that guy didn't pull out, he wouldn't have hurt himself. No, he still would have hurt himself, but it might have been that he crashed into someone else. So whatever his injuries were written for him, whatever was going to happen to that person was written, and how it happened, that was also written for that person as well. So there's no ifs and buts, right? So whatever happens is inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds in the Quran Kareem, when a musibah or a problem happens, what do we say? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This is normally used when people die, but it's not only for that. It's about when every hardship comes our way. And this could be related to, for example, death, where it's commonly used, or it could be related to, you lost your property, someone's house burnt down, for example, they might have lost their job. Anything hardship or difficulty comes our way, we remind ourselves, the one who gave us in the first place, he's the one who's taken it away from us. And like I was going through with my third class today regarding the Quran Kareem, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Quran Kareem about creation itself, right? And we're talking about, having a discussion about the 4 seasons. And within the 4 seasons, Allah is reminding us what? In the winter, everything, all the trees, plants, they die. Then spring, they get the greenery. In summer, they bear fruit. And in the autumn, then they start, the fruit starts rotting away, the leaves start falling, and in the winter what happens? The trees are dead again. But this is a life cycle that Allah is reminding us constantly throughout our life. That the one who gives you can take you away from you, and He can return it, and He can take you away, and He can give you. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gives and takes. Yeah, so it's a constant reminder of throughout our lives. So we live 50 years, we had 50 years of reminders throughout the seasons. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He can give life and take life. And He can give life again and bring the way He does with the earth. So here whatever we have is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then He said this portion of belief then it is what is needed by the one whose heart is illuminated and who is amongst the saints of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is indeed the level of those firmly rooted in knowledge. So without ilm, without knowledge, you will never understand the secrets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in the creation. And to always benefit and take good things, for example, right? Or benefit in a materialistic way. Without hard work, there's no reward, right? We know the earth is full of gold, jewels, diamonds, even simple things like coal, for example, right? But why don't all of us become millionaires? Why? Because you require certain tools to get the gold, to mine the gold. use certain equipment to get you to those, precious jewels. If a person without any tools, what would he get? He'd pick up ordinary stones. Right? That's the furthest he'll get. A bit of soil, a bit of sand. But when you're equipped with tools that Allah has given you and provided you, then you'll get the true, the beautiful aspect of this dunya, right? Like the gold and same with the spiritual journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can't benefit spiritually without ilm. And without ilm and amal, both go together hand in hand. So without that, basically you're nothing. Right? So, even a dictionary or Google, you can say, Google has more information about Quran and Sunnah than us. It doesn't mean that Google is more qualified to go to Jannah. Right? Why? It's about the nur that Allah has placed in our heart. And that comes through seeking a pure knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah.
What do you mean by illuminate?
Illuminating here refers to those whose hearts are illuminated. Here refers to, i.e., how will a heart have nur? Illuminating means nur, light in the heart. We know that the Prophet ﷺ told us that when you do guna, what happens? A black dot goes on your heart. And when you do good deeds, that is replaced with nur in your heart. So this way it refers to, when you continue to do good actions, what happens? The more nur increases in your heart. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ said, the one who, on top of his fard, he does more nafal ibadah. Allah in the Hadith Qudsi says, I become the hands which he grasps with the eyes with which he sees with the ears with. Why? Because the barriers and Allah has placed in the earth within our limbs, those are removed. Why? Through the ibadah and the nur. When we say that, why do people go to peers and awliyaullah and these sheikhs? What they're going to give us, for example? It's, if we look at our hand, for example, the only thing we see is what? Flesh. You get an X-ray machine where you're going to see bones. You get a third type of machine, you can see muscles. Right? MRI machine and so on. So different equipment shows you different aspects of your hand. Right? So we know logically it's possible to see the bones. We know logically it's possible and to see the muscles, because we just get a machine and you can see with the machine straight away. So there must be certain barriers that Allah has put within our eyes, stopping us to see our bones like the X-ray machine. But when you become close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those barriers are removed. That's what this hadith is referring to. So the eyes which you see with, the ears with which you hear with, the hand which you grasp with, Allah becomes those. I.e., Allah removes the restrictions on them. They travel a further distance with a short amount of time. They can see, Sahaba Ikram, prophets are on a different level, a person would say. Sahaba Ikram, they could see in different cities and different lands. In Sham, from Medina Sharif, Makkah Sharif, they could see in different cities. When the Prophet ﷺ was born, and what's the narrations? There was so much nur that we could see the palaces. Right? Where were the palaces? They weren't in Makkah Sharif. They were in a different country. So Allah, because of the nur, Allah removed those veils. Right? So that nur in the heart only comes to ibadah, only through worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the more you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more those things are removed. But don't think that, for example, my life is hard, right? I'm having a problem with this, problem with that, problem with work, problem with my marriage. And people, we consider that to be negative. But in reality, that's positivity. Anyone whose life is going smooth, the awliya, Allah would consider that person is doing something wrong. Because Allah says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ. And this ayah goes on, we will most certainly, most definitely test you with khawf, with fear, with loss of breath, loss of fear. All the challenges are going to come in our life. Right? But the reality is, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. But glad tidings are those who deal with those, who have patience in those challenges. So if you are facing challenges in life, then consider yourself, Allah has selected you and building you up to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he says this is because knowledge is of two types. That which is accessible to creation and that which is not. So the one type of ilm that we can gain, the ilm of the Quran and the Sunnah, the ilm of sciences and so on. To deny knowledge that is accessible is disbelief. So the things we have access to Quran, for example, to deny that and so on, those things which are established, then that will lead to disbelief. Why? Because you're rejecting something which exists, which is established through the Quran, and you're rejecting that. And then it says, on the other hand, and faith is not valid except by accepting knowledge that which is accessible, by leaving the pursuit of knowledge that which is not. And Allah knows best. Here is referring to, like, sometimes, especially youngsters, when they start going into Islam, the first thing they ask you would be what? When is Ya'juj and Ma'juj going to come? Who is Shaitan? When is, Musa alayhi salam? What happened to this? Knowledge of the Akhirah, for example, right? When Isa alayhi salam, when he's going to descend? When is Imam Mahdi going to come? All of the questions youngsters these days want to talk about Akhirah, right? When is Day of Judgment? And they start doing this kind of research. There's a reason why Allah never told us when is the Day of Judgment. When the Prophet ﷺ was asked that, Mata Sa'a, when is Yawm al-Qiyamah, Ya Rasulullah? Mada a'datta laha. The Prophet ﷺ, what have you prepared for it? Forget when is Qiyamah, what have you prepared for it? Because that's the ultimate reality, that's our purpose. So here when he says that don't delve into knowledge that you have given access to, i.e. when is Yawm al-Qiyamah? That's not our concern. Our concern is what have we prepared for Yawm al-Qiyamah? And so chase knowledge which is going to benefit you, which you have access to, i.e. the halal and the haram, the Quran and Sunnah. Knowledge which you don't have access to, you haven't been given access to, then why are you wasting your time chasing those things? It says, if all of creation were to unite in order to eliminate something whose existence has been inscribed in the tablet based on Allah's decree, they will not be able to prevent its existence. So if the whole world got together, they wanted to give you something. If it hasn't been written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you to get that thing, even if the whole world gets together, they can never give you that thing. And same the opposite. If the whole world will stop something from you, right? But if Allah wants you to have it, you're going to have it, no matter what. So imagine you want to go somewhere. Imagine I want to go to Bradford, right? Imagine I want to go to Birmingham to see my parents, inshallah. So, but if Allah doesn't want me to go, I could go outside, my car breaks down. And Habib's like, take my car. I'm about to take his car, something else happens. Something else happens. Everyone's giving me the tools to go, the money I've got, all the means I've got to go. But something keeps happening for me not to go. Why? Because Allah doesn't want me to go. Right? On the other hand, same thing. If I'm meant to get there, right? I get outside, my car breaks down, well, but I'm still meant to get there. Someone else comes to give me their car. But even if something happens to their car, something else will happen, someone might be saying, I'm going to Birmingham, I'm going to go. Maybe I'll end up like that. Some kind of excuse will happen that I will get there. I don't know, I'll give you like the example of risk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes in risk, and I have the personal experience. It's about 2 years ago, during COVID, when I was here, my family was in Utah. So I was in Masjid here, and I seen him on Riyasat, and he said to me that it's Friday, I remember it was a Friday. He's like, I'm getting takeaway from my family, do you want something? You're here in the Masjid. I was staying upstairs in the Masjid. And he said to me, do you want some food? And naturally you don't want to take anything from someone. Human nature, like we have that pride. And I said, no, alhamdulillah, don't worry, I saw something on YouTube. He went. 2 minutes later, Mohsin's dad came, Khalid Sama, and he said, I'm going to get Mohsin some burger here. I remember that name. And then, do you want some? I'm getting some food for my kids. And I was like, no, it's okay. Jazakallah, don't worry, I saw something out. And then I went in my car, I went to Lemon and Crispy, right? And there was one of the kids, father was there, and he said to me, oh, Staji, mashallah, don't worry, your food's sorted, I'll pay for it. I said, no, don't worry, do dua for me, I'll pay myself. And then I got the food, everything, so that person, I got the food, I'm about to pay, and the guy goes, don't embarrass me, I know you're the imam from the masjid, I'm not taking money from you. And he still gave me the food, but Allah told me a lesson. Who am I to reject a gift that Allah has given me? First person I denied, I'm going to do it myself. Second person I denied, I'm going to do it myself. Third person I denied, I'm going to do it myself. Fourth one, Allah said, I'll show you how it's free. And Allah told me a lesson. The risk is written from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if the whole world tries to stop something that's written, going to happen in your life, they will never, ever, ever be able to stop it. And if something is not written for you, and the whole world tries to give you, you will never, ever get that thing. So whatever we have in our life, say Alhamdulillah. Whatever we don't have in our life, Alhamdulillah. It's all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he mentions here the ink of the pen has dried with regard to existence and anything that will occur until the Yawm al-Qiyamah. So whatever is going to happen until the Day of Judgment is fixed now. Okay, so that is going to happen. And however it happens, whatever way it happens, that's how it is meant to be. Then he mentioned that which does not afflict the servant could never have afflicted him. And that which afflicts him could never have missed him. The servant must know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge has preceded the existence of all that exists in creation. So he decreed that which exists by his will in the most perfect manner, one that is rendered inevitable. None can overturn it, overrule it, remove it, change it, or affect it in any way. The Most High Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, indeed the command of Allah is an absolute divine decree. Inshallah, we'll stop here for this, but here, this last paragraph, what does it refer to? That is reminding us that every single thing that exists, the knowledge of Allah, our knowledge, for example, is increasing now. Maybe we're reading something, we gain some more insight into something. But the knowledge of Allah, or every single thing that exists, is created by Allah, right? So He knows exactly the best way it should have been created. It needs to be created. Sometimes we have this mindset that if only it was like this, it would have been slightly better. If I done it like this, it would have been better. Or if that thing happened like this, it would have been better. No, it wouldn't have. The way it happened, that was the best way. Allah, through His infinite knowledge, had it planned like that. Sometimes, just say, imagine I'm going to college this year. I applied to the sixth form, I applied to the college, and I applied to 2 different courses. And then I'm going to sixth form, or just say science, for example. And then, once I started it, I'm like, only if I go to the college to do accounting, that would have been better for me. Whatever has happened, that was best for you. Even if one year got wasted in college, there was some wisdom behind that, there's some reason behind that, some lessons that you wouldn't have learned otherwise, basically. Something to discipline that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. Sometimes, for example, you might have an accident, but that could sit and very minor accident. Like I remember when I was newly passed, I was driving my mom's car, and on my road is a roundabout, and it was icy. But Allah told me through a simple example, and it's quite a small road, it's not like a big roundabout. So the car was probably going like 5 miles per hour. And so it started to slide the car in. So when I put my foot down on the brake, the car didn't stop. It went straight to the railings on the road. But obviously it was so slow, it hit the curb first at 5 miles per hour, then it hit the railings. Nothing happened to the car, nothing happened to the railings. But it taught me a lesson that if it's on ice, and I couldn't see any ice or anything on the road, but I do know it was a cold day. So it taught me a lesson. Sometimes there's ice on the road on a cold day, you might not see, and if you're speeding, there's going to be a bad outcome. If it wasn't going to stop at 5 miles per hour, it's not going to stop at 20, it's not going to stop at 30, 40, 50, right? So that taught me a lesson that if the weather's not good, be civilized and drive safer. So from 5 miles per hour, something that didn't cost me anything, but it was the experience of an accident into a railing, which quickly happened to the railing as well. But it taught me a lesson. And that was something that could benefit in the long run. So now, as I travel every weekend on the motorways, a lesson for that. So you have to think out the box. Sometimes a hardship or a difficulty comes our way to open other doors for us, or other lessons for us. So even your hardships and difficulties are a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any questions regarding that?
One question came forward. So should you accept whatever has been offered by someone?
The sunnah is not to reject a gift from someone. So if someone has offered you something, then you should you should generally take that thing. But obviously it's context based. For example, someone's giving me a chocolate, and I don't eat chocolate because maybe I've got diabetes, for example. Now me taking that chocolate and eating it is bad for me. Because sometimes if you give me a sealed one, that's different. I can put in my bag, have it later. But now the broken pieces, give one piece to everyone. In that context based, I need to eat it out. So you can say, look, I've got diabetes, I'm sorry, but I can't have it. So you kindly reject it in that aspect, right? But sometimes, in our culture, what happens is, for example, you go to someone's house and eat, and they give you Eid, and your mom and dad say, "Khabar, better take it." If you take the Eid from them, you are blessed, you better take the money, right? First time, you see, obviously, you have to. It's a balance. You can't be greedy. This give £5. They don't even stretch their arm out fully, and you give the £5 already. Like, thank you, right? That's a sign of greed as well. That's why parents say don't take it. But if they give you the first time, you say thank you, uncle. No, just do dua for me. Or auntie, just do dua for me. And thank you. Second time, if they push it onto you, then just take it, right? So because who is that person to give you, right? If I give you £5, who am I to give you that £5? Because the one who gave me, he's the one who's giving you. The way company I work for, the place I work, the way they pay me, but Allah's paying it forward through me to someone else. So your risk is written might be through someone else. So when something comes your way, alhamdulillah, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So rejecting it would be a bit ungrateful. You can say it once or twice, thank you, and just do dua for me. But if they're giving you the second time, third time, and they're pushing it onto you, then to not take it, then that's totally, in a way, unacceptable. Because now what's going to happen, the person will be upset. Maybe he doesn't like me. All sorts of things come to the people's mind. Maybe his parents have said that your uncle's like this or they've done this. And this idea and the thought comes to people's mind. So to stop that, then you just take it and you accept it. So obviously it has to be context based as well. So it depends on what you're dealing with. Like sometimes, you come in the hadith shifts that if someone gives you perfume, you don't reject perfume. And then, like the youngsters say, you get those crazy Baba perfumes, yeah? You put it on and then you can't breathe for 2 days. Then, in that aspect, rejecting wouldn't be, like for example, you can just smell it and say, I'll accept it. Because just smelling it, you're benefiting out of it. So you still accept it. What's the purpose of a perfume? Is to smell nice. So you accept the smell of the purpose of the perfume. So you don't necessarily need to take it on board and say that I'm definitely to wear it, and then they grab your hand. I remember when I started studying, I went to, and I just went to my local masjid. I haven't seen that uncle for a long time, my being health. And I just passed to give a high maqam. But when I was about 16, I started studying. And I remember it was a Saturday class we always used to go. And there's one Haji Sahib, he was very sincere. But it was like, his perfume was poisonous. That's how bad it was, right? In terms of the strength and but he'll come, he'll grab your hand, he wouldn't let go of your hand, he'll get the perfume left. And he'll rub the whole bottle on your hand. Obviously they're old, they probably can't smell it. And they want all the boys from the classes to rub it on the carpet. Just because that's how they felt uncomfortable. Obviously you shouldn't do that. If you don't like it, don't rub it on too much on the carpet. Because obviously that causes issues to other people as well. But generally, you have to be mindful as well when you're giving a gift as well. if you're giving a perfume to someone, then be mindful, don't force it on someone. Sometimes you be pushing without giving as well, and then puts the next person in an awkward situation. So the giver and the one who's receiving, they both should be wise in their taking and the giving as well. Someone's giving sweets and you put your hand and take all 10 sweets in the box, right? And there's other 15 guys sitting in the room. Yeah, so basically be mindful of how someone is giving as well. So inshallah, moving on, page should be 55, right?
Yeah. That's true.
Did you complete about the cast and wiping or what's finished? Okay, so next one, these masail, these rulings, the next ones are related to women in terms of purification, but it's extremely important for men to know this as well. Why? Because in the future, those who are not married, you will be married. And generally in our community, women don't go out to learn. Unfortunately, they're not given the opportunity, and then it gets a bit awkward for women as well. I often get messages from women in the community messaging that, for example, I had a miscarriage or my child's passed away in my stomach. How do I manage? How do I manage my salah? Am I pure? Am I impure? And there's loads of false and information in the community about when they should do namaz, when they shouldn't, and so on. So it's important for men to know this as well. And sometimes, I remember sometimes, a female member of the family might not be fasting in Ramadan, for example. They might be due to this topic. They might not be praying the salah, and then you have this spiritual boost, and you're like, some people start forcing their brother and their sister, especially forcing their sister to read namaz, or why is she fasting? How dare she not fast? Be mindful of the Sharia as well in certain times. So that's what this is important for men to know, and this topic as well. So it says menstruation, which is known as pain, postnatal bleeding, which is known as nifas, and dysfunctional uterine bleeding, which is known as istihara. So the three types of bleeding for a woman, which cover this topic, that from a woman that she experiences throughout her life. So the three different scenarios that she can find herself in. First, he mentions the menstruation, and it's known as haid. It's defined as blood that exits the uterus of a woman free from disease or pregnancy, and then after the age of adolescence. So imagine that for uterus, to be the point, so the action comes out from the private part of a woman. Okay, so the blood that exits, it comes out from the front private part of a woman. But in reality, it comes out from her uterus inside. I.e., you could easily understand for youngsters, a womb. If she doesn't have this bleeding, and it's like basically this bleeding, for the youngsters to understand that it cleans out the woman's womb, so she's healthy enough to give birth to children. So a woman who doesn't have this bleeding, in most cases she can't get pregnant and she can't have children. So, sometimes in our Asian cultures, they call it bimari, right? She's bimar, she's unwell, they say that, right? And she's unwell, that's why she's not fasting. She's unwell, that's why she's not praying salah. She's not really unwell. And they make it seem like as is a defect. In reality, the woman who's not having it, she's the one who's unwell. Why? Because she's going against the normal practice of the way Allah created a woman. So if a woman does experience a bleeding from her uterus, which is a monthly cycle or periods as known as, then she is impure in those days to pray salah, but she's not impure as a person. She's still pure as a person. And she is not unwell. Right? People say she's unwell and so on. She is well. Hence, she is functioning properly to give birth and so on. He said the minimum, so this happens every month. So the woman experiences bleeding every month. So the minimum days that this can happen for, it has to be 72 hours to be considered as a monthly period. So if a woman was only bleeding, for example, she bled on Monday and Tuesday, that'll be 48 hours. Wednesday she stopped bleeding, back to normal. The Monday and Tuesday she still originally she'll think, oh, my period has started, she'll miss her namaz, right? But on Wednesday when it stops, she'll realize, okay, it was less than 72 hours. She'll have to make up those namaz again. Alright, so the minimum is 3 days. And the maximum it mentions here is 10 days. And the average will be between that. So every woman is different. So every woman is different. So the minimum bleeding will be 3 days, the maximum will be 10 days. So a woman would know her personal cycle, her personal experience. So some women might bleed for 5 days every month. So they know their routine is 5 days. Another woman might bleed for 7 days, she'll know her routine is 7 days. Others might bleed for 9 days, the routine is 9 days. But if it goes against her routine, and she bleeds, for example, 5 days, 1 month, 5 days, and the next month it's 2 days, then those, because it's less than the minimum, she has to make up the salah. But normally she doesn't make up the salah. So every month, those 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 days, she has a monthly cycle, she's bleeding, then she doesn't read the namaz. Even afterwards, she doesn't read the namaz. But if she misses any fasts, then she has to make up those fasts. Right? But she doesn't have to make up the namaz. So that's one key thing that they mentioned here. The minimum is 3 days, the maximum is 10 days. They might elaborate on some key points regarding that. He says, if the bleeding is less than 3 days and more than 10 days, then it is excused blood. Excess blood, which is excused, right? It is not menstruation. Rather, it is called the third type, istihada. Right? So the first type was what? It's called haid, her monthly cycle. Monthly cycle is only if it's between 3 and 10 days. If it's less than 3 days or more than 10 days, imagine she bleeds for 12 days, right? Then the extra days, or the days that were less, only 1 day she might have be bleeding, or 2 days, that is called an istihada. So I mentioned in the footnote here, in the Hanafi school, just keep it simple. So generally, this mentions here that a woman will have to keep a record. This is something women don't do, right? And this has to be done. A woman has to keep a record of a monthly cycle, how many days, and what's her habit. Okay, because they have different experiences, and some women might stop bleeding for 2-3 months in a row. Some women, for example, they continuously bleed. Some after childbirth, the different rulings, right? So she has to keep a record of her monthly cycle. He said during the period of the menstruation, its maximum is 10 days. Any color that is seen, as well as intermittent breaks from bleeding again within the possible 10 days, is considered a menstrual cycle, thus preventing her from praying or fasting. And then in the footnote on this one, it mentions, however, every time the blood completely stops within the 10 days, meaning there is no color at all, she must resume her fasting and her worship and her praying. Okay, so they mention something here is that, for example, she was bleeding for 4 days. Now she knows her period has started, right? Then 2 days she didn't bleed. Now it's gone up to day 6, but day 5 and 6 she didn't bleed. Now from day 7, 8 and 9 she bled. So those 2 in the middle, if she fasted in those days, because she thought my period has stopped, those fasts don't count, because they're part of the period. Right? At the same time, that those salahs were really, because that's considered a part of her period. Okay, so she's not responsible for those salahs in that sense. So that's one key thing they mentioned here. So it has to, even if it's on, off, as long as it's within those days. But as soon as it stops and she thinks about bleeding has stopped, she has to go back to her fasting and back to her salah. Even if it's, because she doesn't know if it's going to start again tomorrow. Some women, for example, what happens is 4 days they're bleeding. Then in the morning they wake up, it's stopped. So they read the Zohar, they read the Asr, and Maghrib starts again. So now they have to stop because it's within the 10-day window, right? It's within the 10 days. So if that happens, then they have to stop praying again. It's still considered their monthly cycle. So any fast that they miss within these days, they have to do those fasts, right? But any namaz they miss, they don't do those prayer. They don't need to make up that prayer. Another few things they mentioned here that a woman is not allowed to do on a monthly cycle. The first is marital relationships are haram. Okay, so husband or wife, they can't have any relationship within that period of time. The ulama have also written that the husband is not allowed to touch the woman in her, even not just the private area, but around her aura basically. You know how man's aura is, the thighs and so on. That you're not even allowed to touch your partner there. Why? Because you most likely will end up doing the guna as well. So even within that period of time, the marital relationships are haram in that time. Tawaf of the Kaaba is also not permissible. So she's not allowed to do tawaf of the Kaaba. Entering a masjid, right? So they're not allowed to enter a masjid. You know, sometimes, like for example, janazah happens, and women go to the masjid. She's not allowed to actually go to that place of the masjid which is considered part of the masjid. You know, in the modern days, we have the toilets, part of the masjid, the shoe area. Technically, Islamically speaking, where this red carpet is, that's the boundary of the masjid. As soon as you go into the brown carpet with the shoe areas, you are not inside the masjid. Right? There's a kitchen area, that's the shoe area, the wudu area. But within the masjid boundary, which should be these walls and this wall in this masjid, right? The woman is not allowed to enter that on her monthly cycle. Hence, that's why, for example, in mosques, like central masjid, for example, you will never see that women in the main prayer hall downstairs. Whenever they go for janazah or they sit in a puri, for example, it'll be upstairs or another side room designated for that purpose. Why? For women. Same with Islamic studies classes which are made for women in the masjid, they'll be designated a separate place. So women on the monthly cycle, they're allowed to, for example, in this masjid, they're allowed to enter the back hall, but they're not allowed to enter this hall. Right? So a woman is prohibited from entering the masjid. So do bear this in mind. So when they go for janazahs and stuff, sometimes, you know, to see the face, the access way to see the face might be through the masjid. So it's not permissible for the woman to go and see and walk through the masjid. It says, being touched, it says, mentions here anyway, being touched from the navel to the knees. Right? So even her husband can't touch her in that part. It says here, and that is without a cloth or, means basically skin to skin. But with kapre and stuff, it's permissible. Then it mentions here is reciting Quran. She can't do tilawat of Quran. In those times, in those days, a woman can't do tilawat of Quran. But she can read parts of the Quran which she uses as the dua. So any parts of the Quran which she uses as a dua, for example, people read Ayatul Kursi for protection as a dua, they should be able to do that. If people read, you know, and any certain ayah of the Quran for just as a habit for dua, for example, right? Then you allow certain part of Surah Al-Fatiha if you read Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, Sirat al-Ladina. Now you're doing that as a dua, that is permissible and that is allowed as well. So then, another thing a woman is not allowed to touch is the Quran. Touching the Quran is prohibited within those days as well. So these things are often, you know, overlooked, but it's important that these things are kept in mind as well. So, you know, real alim would be ilm of the Quran and the Sunnah, right? So these rulings are taken from the Quran. So it's for a real student of knowledge, he should also know the Masail regarding women as well. So it's important for them to know. And For a woman, she should generally know knowledge pertaining to men as well, because, for example, it could be a single mother. Now she has to teach her children about the halal and haram. So hence she needs to know as well the rights and the responsibilities of the child as well. Any questions regarding this before we move on regarding these few things?
Say if the woman doesn't fast due to her period and she is meant to make it up but she doesn't, what happens?
So a woman, for example, she missed 2 fasts or 5 fasts, 10 fasts, right? Because of her monthly cycle in Ramadan. It's hard for her to miss it. At that moment, to miss it is necessary, but it's hard for her to make up that fast. If she does that, she does Gunai Kabira, which is missing Rosa. Yeah, so missing 1 fast of Ramadan, you can never make that up, even if you fast the entire lifetime. Right? So it's still hard for her to make that fast up. So ideally, it should be done before the next Ramadan. Right? But even if she hasn't done it, it doesn't mean our next Ramadan came, the last one did not. No, she still has to make it up. So if she hasn't been making them for the last 10 years, then she needs to work out how much it is and then make all those fasts up as well. So do you ask any question? You have to that's what he's written on.
What if she wants to make up the prayers just now? She wants to. Is that allowed?
So if a woman missed her prayers because of her monthly cycle, now afterwards she wants to make them up, it's not fault for her to make them up, so it's not fault on her to make those prayers up. But at the same time, if she has any qadha namaz, she's utilized that time to make a qadha namaz. Any namaz that she has missed out of her menstrual cycle out of laziness and whatever the reasons are, then it's fine for her to make those up first. Right? So she should do that. But if Allah has given you an excuse and a leeway, then you've been ungrateful. Sometimes people have qasar namaz. I'm sure to the prayer when they're traveling, read 2 farz, right? Some people say, I'm a hero, I'm too pious, I'm going to read 4. Now you're not following the hukam. The hukam is from Allah. The one who's telling you to read 4, he's the same Allah is telling you to read 2, so you read 2. So the same Allah is telling you you're not praying on a monthly cycle, then he's the one who's telling you not to pray, so you don't pray. Right? So it's best to follow the hukam. There's more reward in that.
Whilst the woman has a menstrual cycle and if she enters the masajid, would it make the place impure, or what exactly happens?
Nothing happens. If a woman enters the masjid while she's impure, she just gets guna. Nothing happens in the place. We know that Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, she would comb the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hair, and whilst she's on a monthly cycle. So now this teaches a lesson that a woman is not impure. See how ulama take a ruling for one thing. She would comb the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hair on a monthly cycle, right? So the ulama says, if a woman becomes impure in those days, then how could she touch the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Right? So it means if she was allowed to touch the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, comb his hair, then a woman is not considered impure. In those days, the disbelievers, what they would do with the women when they were in the monthly cycle, they would move them out the house. They wouldn't let them cook for them. They wouldn't, let them be in the house. If the blood got on the clothes, they had to cut that piece of cloth up and throw the cloth away. Right?
This happens now still in some places.
Yes, it still happens in some places. But we know that a woman is still pure. As a human being, she's still pure. She hasn't become impure because of her monthly cycle. That's one, incorrect thing that is put out amongst the community. That is a false understanding of that. A woman is still pure, but she just can't pray salah. Certain things she can't do. Can she still cook food? Yes, she can. Can she still do the chores around the house? Yes, she can. It doesn't mean that she made the auntie now. The curry's gone, impure, is haram for you guys to eat because she was on a monthly cycle. People believe that. It's not fun. You might find it funny and ridiculous, right? But some people actually believe that. Yeah, and they still apply that in their lives. But we as Muslims don't believe such things. Is there any other question? That's a good health. Generally, like when a woman experiences this, right, because her body is changing, right, because it's purifying itself, the doing this, so she might be unwell that day, health-wise, I'm talking about, right? Not spiritually, but she might emotionally be unwell, right? And this is something that future husbands need to keep in mind as well. You know, some women, every woman is different. When a woman experiences a monthly cycle, some women become so unwell that they be bedbound for a week. Yeah? So this is a fact, this is not something, fairy tale. So no one knows that until obviously after you got married, and then you're like, she's unwell. Now you can't force her to do things because she's unwell. So you as a Muslim have to be caring and considerate of your partner as well, right? Because she's become unwell. But not everyone's case might be like that. And for example, some women give birth to a child and they'll be perfectly fine the next day. They just be doing the normal business. Some women, for example, they'll be pregnant, heavily pregnant, and they'll be going to gym and going to do sports. Other women, they get pregnant and they can't get out of bed. Right? Everyone will have a different experience with the partner. Right? So it's not like one solution fits all. But so it's important that as a Muslim you understand that as well. So it's not like what we see in romantic movies and all that everything always going comfortable. You will have ups and downs in marriages. It won't be a joke, Romeo and Juliet, right? Life won't be like that all the time. Marriage does bring challenges. Sometimes, for example, the husband, he might fall unwell, right? This happens, and so many cases come to me. The husband gets unwell and he can't go to work anymore. And the wife says, what kind of useless husband are you? What kind of husband are you? You're not doing you can't go to work. But now his health, so the wife has to understand that he's unwell, he can't go to work. Same on the other hand, the woman could be unwell and she can't do certain chores. So you have to keep that in mind.
Quick question, I've just been listening to all of this. Do you not think this is all based on how you personally maintain yourself? If you're healthy, then when you do come to that period of time, you're not going to be bedbound. I've seen people, if they're healthy, they'll be. Do you understand what I'm saying?
That
how you maintain yourself?
No, I don't. That clashes with our understanding as Muslims.
How?
Because, for example, right, I'll give you a COVID example. There are people who suffer from asthma, people who suffer from lung disease. They had COVID, they survived, and a guy who's been healthy playing football and is so fit, eating healthy, and he's passed away. So it's not a result of your lifestyle necessarily, because some women, they are extremely healthy, they eat good, they live good, they do exercise, yet when the monthly cycle comes, monthly period comes, they do fall out well, and that's how their body is designed.
No, obviously I don't anything. I can't comment on that. I'm talking about males. For example, you see males who are 35 years old, they suffer from diabetes, their stomachs are hanging out, they can't go to work, they sign on, and then you get some males who are touching 50 and they're very fit and healthy. My father was nearly 100 years old and was fit and healthy. So
but that's also relevant. Like, I know what you're saying. Your lifestyle does play a role, but not necessarily that. So, like, for example, some people, and generally some people, they live a healthy life and they suffer illnesses. They have diabetes. I know children have diabetes, 12 years old, but they've done nothing to cause it in that sense. So, like, it doesn't necessarily depend on your lifestyle. Some people, they eat unhealthy all their life and they still live till 100. You get it? So it's not necessarily, but obviously the sunnah is to eat healthy, live a healthy lifestyle, do exercise. The Prophet ﷺ, his chest and his stomach were equal, i.e. that teaches us a lesson. He ﷺ most of the time ate once a day. The Prophet ﷺ never ate more than 1/3 of his stomach. Right? So these things are part of the sunnah, but it doesn't mean 100% you're going to live a healthy life.
No, I'm saying, like you said, keep yourself healthy.
So that is the standard given, and anyone who doesn't eat healthy, doesn't look after his health, then he's automatically clashing the sunnah. Because if you study the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, exercise was part of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam life. We know hadith where he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would run a race, right? Even with his wife sallallahu alaihi wasallam would run. So that shows the women should be healthy as well. So it's not only for men, but at the same time the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you just study how he ate sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's sufficient to show you that he was a healthy person. You know, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam had fully fleshed hands and feet, you know, at the age of 60. And what the ulama, when they write about it, he had broad shoulders, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, flat stomach. All this denoted what strength, he was healthy. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam never had, you know, more than, you could say 15, 20 white hairs sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because of his health. He showed that even at the age of 60, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was fit and healthy. But this doesn't always mean that a person can't get well. Right? So, like, for example, as you're a police officer, like, you know, Ustad Malik, he was a police officer. What happened? He fell downstairs and he was bed bound for 5 years. Right? So, even though he was a healthy police officer, something would happen to trigger it off. Right? Even though he was fit, he was in the force, doing things and chasing criminals, he requires strength, energy, he's a big 6-foot guy. But when something happens, it can happen. And you know, like, you know, for example, I'll give you like my father, he went to Hajj, and this was in 2013, I think, or 12. He went to Hajj, he did Hajj, he came back. In 2014, my grandparents were going Hajj, and my nana, he wanted to do Hajj for one of his parents or uncles and so on. And he said to my dad, you be in Hajj, you come do Hajj, and you'll help us out as well. So my dad went to Hajj with them. They went on a Monday. You know, this time quick. You know, life is so unexpected, right? So they went to Hajj. They landed there. 2 days later, there was a storm, and the cranes fell in Makkah Sharif. Remember, they fell in the Haram Sharif. My father witnessed that. You know, people being squashed. And what happened? The rest of the 4 weeks, my granddad was babysitting my father. Why? Because he was mentally not there. Because of the trauma and the shock he had from seeing that. He went to take care of them, they ended up taking care of him. So, you know, these things can happen, but what I'm saying is that a human being has to be mindful of this. Life is not always going to be positive. You know, you see these TikTokers get married and they go on these honeymoons, and you know, you think life's going to be so sweet. When I get married, I'm going to be enjoying life, and my marriage is going to be so Romeo and Juliet. It's not going to be like that. If you think it's going to be like that, you're going to fool. Wake up. Right? Your life is going to be up and down. One day the wife's going to have an issue, one day the husband's going to have an issue. One day the wife's going to be unwell, one day the husband's going to be unwell. Mentally, physically, whatever it is, there's going to be ups and downs. So both people, you need to keep your hukuk rights in mind as well. So, the last question, and then we'll go to the next question.
Somebody was told that it was a sunnah to eat 2 times a day. Is this true or false?
It is the Prophet ﷺ generally wouldn't eat 2 times a day, and those, when it refers to 2 times in that aspect, it wouldn't be 2 meals like what we consider 2 meals. You wake up in the morning.
Sehri and Iftari.
So, like for example, Sehri and Iftari. But if you look at the Sehri and the Iftari of the Prophet is half of our Iftari. If you add the Prophet Iftari and Sehri together, is half of our Iftari. We have the samosa pole that can keep us going for 6 roses, right? So obviously it's respected and is relevant to, like, in terms of how they ate, what they ate. You know, 1/3 of our stomach, if we did that, we think that we haven't even started. You know, what we call starters, they call our meal basically. Yeah? So our starters are their meal, and our meal is basically zulm, what they consider as zulm, and our bodies. Yeah? You know, it's a fact, I'm not joking. You know, if ulama, Sufiyan Karam, they knew that you ate like the way we do, you know, they consider that you're doing guna. Why? Because you're wronging your own body. Yeah, so doing zulm on yourself, you know. So the body has a right to own us as well. may Allah give us all the tawfiq to implement this and truly fulfill the rights of our body as well, in terms of health, exercise, fitness, eating right. But that doesn't mean that everything's going to happen nice and sweet for you. Yeah, so you could become unwell due to illnesses which you might not think that you've caused, but it might just happen. And so that could happen as well. Inshallah, for the last 5 or so minutes, we'll go through the next text, inshallah.
Page 30.
I think we've got the bottom half, 28 left, the last part. It should be. So we were talking about purifying ourselves and in terms of the adab of, so he mentioned the adab of going to the toilet. And so the first,
stones.
so the first at the top Imam Ghazali mentioned here, so this book is more based, even though it covers about some fiqh rules, but the book is mostly based on the spiritual aspect of the why we do things, why we do wudu, how the attitude should be when you go eat something, the attitude when you go to the toilet, right? So like you mentioned here, when you go to the toilet, it's not about eating, go to the toilet, and then just walking off. No. When you leave the toilet, he told you the dua that you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for removing the harmful things from your body. Right? And thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving the body the nutrients from that food that we ate as well. So going to the toilet is a ni'mah and a blessing from Allah. So Imam Ghazali, in this aspect of where even though he's covering the wudu and all that, he's trying to give you the dimension that we normally don't see, the spiritual dimension of eating, the benefits of eating, how we should be grateful of it, and then when we go to the toilet, then not just going to the toilet and then walking off, but the spiritual benefit, how we could thank Allah for reflecting on removing the harmful things from our body. So here, he mentions here, it says about doing istinja in general. He mentioned that people will be punished in the grave for not doing istinja properly. Why? Because the urine drops or the impurity will go on the kapra and they'll remain impure. So here Imam Ghazali goes on to say, in the case of, you could say, the stool, which is number 2, as you know, if you want to use only stones, this doesn't really apply, it depends on what you eat. You know, in places like where people only ate dates, for example, or they only had like badams and nuts to eat, right? So obviously the thing would exit the body would be dry and it wouldn't really be but if you eat loads of liquid or kind of objects or food, then what happens? Then your stool is more runny as well. So it requires that you wash it. So here I mentioned that if you're only going to use tissue, this doesn't really apply to the food that we kind of eat in this climate or where we live in the world. So we still need to wash ourselves as well. But he mentioned that if you only use stones, i.e. tissue in our time, then you use 3 tissues. And if 3 is not enough, you use 5 tissues. If 5 is not enough, you use 7 tissues. As long as you're content that you purify yourself. Then he mentions here that when you actually purify yourself, the method of purifying yourself should be that you're only targeting the impure area. Why? Because if you're targeting the impure area and then just swiping all the way, then the part that was pure, you've dragged the impurity onto there as well. So you just target the area that has the impurity on it and not be excessive. Okay, so he mentions here, for example, if you only have 6 stones, right? 5 didn't do the job, and you're like, you know what, I only can use 5 or 7. The 7 I don't have, 5 I've got, Jalo, I'll leave it a bit dirty. No. The best is to use even odd numbers, right? 3, 5, 7, so on. But what's farz is to clean yourself. So if that means you're going to end up on like a 10 and you only had 10 and you ended up on 10, then you use 10. Right? The higher level is to clean yourself, and then if you can achieve that by doing odd numbers, then 3, 5, 7, then you do that. But the main maqsad is that you fulfill the obligation of cleaning yourself. He says, use only your left hand to do istinja. Right? So 4 things are mentioned normally in the shaitan does with his left hand. Eating, drinking, giving and taking. And Muslims should do those 4 things, yeah? Khana, pina, lena, dena, let's say in Urdu, easy to remember. So eating, drinking, and giving and taking, 4 things should be done with the right hand, and as opposed to shaitan, and we do with the opposite, with the left hand. So, but things such as istinja should be done with the left hand, right? Is it upon finishing the process of cleaning, then you say a dua, i.e. when you finish it, وَقُلْ عِنْدَ الْفَرَاغِ مِنَ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءِ. This is not when you're still sitting on the toilet, you don't istinja, you start doing dua on the toilet. We mentioned the adab of doing dua would be if you were in a cubicle after you left the cubicle. If you're in the toilet, bathroom like we have with the sink and toilet all in one place, after you left the bathroom basically, you make the du'as and you do all the du'as as you can in one go. But what's the dua? It says, Allahumma tahhir qalbi min al-nifaq. You done istinja, but what's the dua? Oh Allah, purify my heart from hypocrisy. Right? So, it's spirituality. So you've taken the filth out from our body already. We've done the dua. Right? There's a dua for removing the filth. Oh Allah, thank you for removing the harmful objects from our body. But now after purifying yourself with water, doing istinja, what's the dua for that? Oh Allah, purify. My body's pure now, but purify my heart. Yeah, from nifaq. Tahir qalbi min al-nifaq. And remember, obviously it's hard to remember all these du'as in Arabic, right? You might be thinking this is a mission to learn the du'as. What's farz on us, yeah, this is important to know as well. What's farz on us? How much Arabic is farz on every lay Muslim, normal, standard Muslim? Enough that your namaz is complete. That's what's farz on us. So that would be what? Normal namaz, you could say, right? And within the namaz, how much Quran is farz on us? It's Surah Fatiha and Surah, and another Surah with the 3 ayahs. So just say Surah Fatiha, Surah Ikhlas. That's a minimum required for a Muslim. Now you might be thinking, oh, these long du'as Imam Ghazali is given, right? It's a long thing. How am I going to memorize all these things? Yeah, it's a bit hard to memorize them. The main maqsad is what? The lesson, the purpose. Imam Ghazali didn't put these sunnah du'as, or the Prophet didn't read the du'a just so we don't know what we're saying. The maqsad is what? For purification. So if you can't learn the Arabic, at least, okay, I must tell yourself, okay, the English says, oh my Lord, purify my heart from hypocrisy and keep my private parts away from haram. So now we know what it means, right? So we can say that in English, oh Allah, you know, purify my heart as well, and help me protect my private parts from haram. We can even do that in English, even if you thought that in our mind is still a dua. We're thinking that in our heart is still a dua. But the whole purpose is we keep turning back to Allah. We keep reminding ourselves about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the purpose of these du'as. So when, you know, the filth comes out of our body, you say, oh, already Imam Ghazali's book, there's a dua for after using a toilet, only yaad rahi, forget it. No, don't forget it. I know the purpose. The purpose is what? Oh Allah, thank you for removing the harmful things from our body. Just remind yourself of that. That is the dua. Yeah, so you thank Allah. So these extra things can be done in English, Urdu, Patwari, whatever language you speak, yeah? French. You have a French student here. He probably just knows that one word, unfortunately. But we have a French student here, right? But whatever language you know, whatever meanings, however you understand it, you use that way. And Allah is not limited to language. But the namaz obviously has to be done. And the minimum required for you to know Arabic is the namaz and Surah Fatiha and one more surah that you can read your namaz with. And that'll be sufficient as a Muslim. Like, you know, our elders who never really, like my grandma, she doesn't know how to read the Quran. Right? She's never ever learned how to read Quran. But she reads the namaz, she knows the minimum, she knows Surah Fatiha and Surah Qul Allah. Last 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, she's just been reading the same thing. Right? But she has the passion for Quran, but she never read it. So now she still reads Quran every day, but she does this La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, La ilaha illallah. She reads Quran like that. Even though she's not reading the Quran, but it's Allah looks at your hearts, right? So Allah's not bound by language. Yeah, Allah's not bound by you know, what language you speak. So if you don't know the Arabic dua, learn the English at least. And just do the dua, drop your links in English, inshallah. And Allah will accept your du'as. And then the last paragraph, I think that is the last paragraph. Yeah, then he says, scrub your hands with the earth or the ground, and then there no soap here. So obviously this book was originally written in hundreds of years ago in Al-Ghazali's time. But generally, he mentions here that obviously the things that when we mention stone, we apply in our context would be tissue. When it mentions here that you wash your hands or you use earth to purify your hands, you just use the sink, you wash your hands. If you have something extra, you use the salt and purify yourself. And then rinse your hands with water at the end. Okay, so you just use soap and water and purify yourself. So here it's important to keep in mind, inshallah, we'll start from the adab of wudu, the etiquettes of wudu, and next lesson, inshallah. Any questions on that? Yeah, so if you can't memorize the du'as, then at least memorize the dua in English. The whole purpose is to build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Could I elaborate on something? One of my shuyukh, he said that regarding the istanja, he says that he makes you think about. We were reading the Imam Ghazali book as well there, and then he says to us that even animals, when they go outside and they do number 2 or whatever, the ground can be fertilized with their feces, but the human is so that nothing can be done with it. It just stinks, it just smells, meaning that it's all your ego and all your character, bad character, and that's what you are taking out.
Yeah, so this reminds me of Islam has 3 aspects, right? And the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam. One is Jibreel alayhi salam said, what's Islam? He asked, what's Iman? There's a third thing he asked as well. Islam, and he asked the Prophet, what is Islam? The Prophet said, the 5 pillars, namaz, roza, zakat, hajj, shahadat. When he asked, what is Iman? He said, Amantu billahi wa malaikatihi, to believe in Allah, the angels, the books, the scriptures, Yawm Qiyamah. The third thing he asked was ihsan. This is what people lack, which is spirituality. Right? So Islam has a third aspect as well, which is spirituality. So when we read the Quran, or these days people read the Quran and hadith, they just surface read the Quran. Like even if that reminds me of for example, Surah Al-Kafirun. Even the Surah Al-Kafirun, what does it mean? Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun. Say, O beloved, Allah is addressing the Prophet sallallahu. Say, O you disbelievers, Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun. O you who disbelieve. Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun, la a'budu ma ta'budu. I do not worship what you worship. And you do not worship what I worship. Right? Apparently, there's a discussion between the Prophet ﷺ telling the disbelievers. But spiritually, the ulama want to just take us, you're talking to your spiritual ego and your desire. I do not worship the materialistic things that you worship, O my nafs. You worship money, you worship, power in the earth, you worship all the materialistic things. I do not worship. So there's a discussion between yourself, you and your ego, you and your... So the Quran has this, our Sharia has this spiritual side to it as well, which can only be taken from, true ulama, true people who can read between the lines, like they say right in English, right? So Islam is not always about the literal sense of what it says. It's about the spiritual journey with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So like you mentioned about the istinja thing, that is reality, right? Because, even like if you look at the other aspect, the impurity of an animal, like cows, dung and all that, we make crops with it. So we're eating from something which is impure that Allah through the earth has made pure for us and given us vegetation through that. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His power is, there's so many lessons. The more we ponder about it, the more secrets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings, opens up in our hearts and our minds. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us all the tawfiq to truly ponder about this. Amin. Allahumma rabbana atina في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. Oh Allah, give us knowledge which benefits us, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, give us pure and halal rizq and earnings, Ya Allah. And Ya Allah, purify our heart from all types of diseases, Ya Allah. Spiritual illnesses, physical illnesses, mental illnesses, Ya Allah. Grant us shifa in all aspects, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, any sincere du'as we have in our hearts, any needs we have, any parshanities we have, any difficulties we have, Ya Allah, solve all our problems and our needs, Ya Allah. وصلى الله تعالى على حبيبه محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم